Good morning, everyone. We're happy to have you here and this morning for our Building a Culturally Based Cherokee Curriculum presentation as a part of the CCO Conference of Leaders. Whoever's going to start us this afternoon, dive right in.
Siêu nagad aduhin dawadong jalak jundel kwasti dagilon stane ho diga dayos kaduha ni digwa nikida ni gilon hi di kiao jige do ha galielik ni hiskun nagad galielik jije do ha. So my name is Kirk, and I work at the Cherokee Immersion School, and I'm from Marble City, if you all know where Marble City, Oklahoma is from. And I am glad to be here, and I'm glad you all are here too. Hopefully we'll have something that you all find interesting and find to be of some useful value to you. And that's my intro. I'll go ahead and let Udawadisk introduce himself.
Sil nagad Udawadisk Dawado Chalak Ayet Chalak Wanahist Dagilo Stonyho Ale Kujuneg and Asti Fine Oklahoma Awatasi Dola and Uthif Marble Cities School. So hello, I'm Howard Paden. I work for Cherokee Language Department, and I grew up not too far from Aduhin. What was good about that is it allowed there's two major stomp grounds in that area, and there was a lot of elders that was alive and well when we grew up, and it was a time that they didn't hesitate too much to share. So we was in a fortunate region. Of course, Wyman, the elders I'm talking about was his relatives. So, but now we find ourselves in a unique time, and so we want to talk about that with making our curriculum more Cherokee cultural focus. So, Alduhin, if you want to start it off, I'll jump in, or you just. Either okay. Or we'll just work it like that.
Okay. So the reason that we kind of chose this topic is because it's one that is very relevant and pertinent to what we have going on. So the Cherokee Immersion Charter School, where I work at now, was started back in 2002. It's been in operation, and there is a curriculum that has been used, but it's not really a well-defined curriculum, and that's no one's fault, really. It's just that with resources being what they were, they did certain parts of it. But the curriculum that was put together, the first attempt, and we've seen this with other places and other immersion systems and then other places where they've done immersion, your first thought is, okay, we need to find out what the standards are for the school, and we translate those into our language. So we took a lot of the state standards, the Oklahoma state standards, a lot of the materials that was used in English-based classrooms, and we just translated those. I should say they translated those, but we had those translated, and those were done into Cherokee, and those were fine as a starting point. But then once you start getting into it, you realize that you have to have something that's yours, because for those students to really identify and connect with the content and the content in the language, you have to have something that's really yours. And while I'm not saying that some of these aspects that were found in the Oklahoma curriculum aren't ours, they weren't us as a people. They don't represent Cherokee ideas, Cherokee ideologies, Cherokee philosophies. Last year, was it last year, Davidis? Or was it this year? We went to the Ojibwe. Time goes weird. It was this year, wasn't it? Okay, so in the spring, we took a trip to, was it Wadakadading, I believe, if I've mispronounced that. Forgive me.
I think that's close enough. I think between the two of us, we may really butcher that the name of that school, but what we learned was we're definitely not butchering that. Right?
Yeah. So we took this trip and we found that they had this cultural-based curriculum in which they operated their immersion school. And it was remarkable. So what they've done is they've taken a calendar year. So they, January to December or August till July or whatever it is. And they've basically placed these cultural activities throughout that calendar. And they do those activities when the time is appropriate. So when we were there, they were finishing up their sap season. So they go out and they collect sap from trees. They bring that sap in, they process it into a syrup, and then they keep some of it as syrup, and then they make some of it into sugar. They do all these activities with the kids. So the kids go out in February and they go with these elders and they learn how to collect sap. They learn how to process that sap into syrup and then that syrup into sugar. And so what we were seeing was this really remarkable activity, cultural-based initiative. And the children were learning language and they're learning things, but they were also learning academic standards. So we were in, I think it was the second and third grade classroom, and they were boiling down the syrup into sugar and they were pouring it into these little plastic casts. Well, they were learning about the cultural elements. And so there was this gentleman who was there who got to know Chato, and he was telling the kids in Ojibwe about, well, this is how we used to do it. When I was young, we didn't have some of these metal implements. We didn't have these, and talking about that. And then they went into these academic lessons. And so they had these casts that had like 4 across and 6 down. And so they were having to learn how to multiply by taking the rows and columns and whatnot. And so they were doing these academic-based standards on these activities while doing these cultural activities. And so everything they do, a vast majority of what they do, they can fit into a cultural base. And then they can just say, well, what academic standards do we have that work? This seems to really connect with the kids. So they have a really deeper meaning behind these things they do. And so during the year, they're collecting rice when it's time to collect wild rice. They're going fishing in this traditional way. They know about their treaty. So one of the important things for them is that they operate a little differently in terms of their tribe than how we do. They have the same people, but I guess depending on where you're at, which lake you're associated with, is how you're named. And you have slightly different rights with your place than those with other places. So they need to know those so they know what their rights are when it comes to hunting and fishing, things of that nature. And so they do all of these activities and they do them in a cultural way. They learn the language. We sat in on an 8th grade classroom, and the teacher was really good. She was a very good teacher. And there were all of these things going on, and you could tell what was remarkable. You could tell these kids were operating in the language. So we saw clear evidence that these children were culturally Ojibwe, which was really cool to see. But then we also saw, in terms of the language, they were speaking at this high level. Now, they may not have been speaking exactly like their elders, but they were getting there. They were doing something that I hadn't seen in other programs, to be honest. And even with ours, we haven't seen that level of proficiency with our students. And one of the clear connections was that these students were Ojibwe kids who knew how to speak, and they were grounding them in their culture. And that had a tremendous amount of resonance with each of them. They knew who they were. And we saw that, and we saw this is what we need to do. We need to have this same kind of system, this same kind of curriculum base that we operate from if we want to have Cherokee people who are speaking Cherokee as well. And in this classroom, you'd see these kids talking back and forth. They start their day every day with this sage ceremony. So the principal would come around and he'd have this thing, and the student, he would light it, and the students would smoke themselves. And they would do a prayer. One of the kids would stand up and do this prayer for the class. And he went to each class, and each class did this. And that's how they start every single day. They have a tree that they go to, and if there was, I think there was someone who was sick, wasn't it, Howard? There was a kid who would, and they were putting tobacco. It was remarkable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What was interesting, this is something that we've talked about for a while. I see Waddick scale. It's something that he's dreamed about for a while as a cultural-based curriculum, because we know that in order to actually build Cherokees, it's more than just a language. Within that is a metaphysical understanding of what it means to be Cherokee, and we have to do that through the track in the medium of our language. And so if we were just converting mainstream ideology into our language and doing basically a word replacement type, or then basically we're building a mainstream folks with some Cherokee language understanding. And so it's not that we're against the world that we live in, but it has to come to the vein of who we are as people. And so this has been probably a decade or more in the works. Of course, Alduheen has talked about it because he was raised, of course, by speakers and a speaking mother and a speaking grandparents, and he knows there's something different. There is a way that we can teach by tasting, doing, feeling, where it's not just this, we're sitting in the classroom and we're talking about some form of understanding of science or whatever the subject may be. And it's this basically memorization. So the idea is to figure out what type of goal we want. And so if we want a certain standard of a Cherokee person at 18, then what do we do at 1 year old? And what do we do at 5, 7, And so we are in the process of bringing in different Cherokee speaking teachers and that sort of thing, and saying, okay, what does it mean? What is our standard? What do we want the end product to be? And build the curriculum from birth to that age. And so if we are wanting to build our grandparents or the elders that different ones of us have grew up around, then we have to allow them to have similar experiences in order to end up with the same type of thought processes and understanding of the world that they live around. So we can do that in the midst of all of that. You can also put science. You can, if we are teaching somebody how to make hominy or kanachi or whatever that may be, we can, the ash water and the things we have to do to make hominy. We can explain pH levels. We can do all that sort of stuff, but it's through the vein of who we are as a people. And so that is what we are working on. That's something that we have dreamed about. It is good to see other tribes that has taken this on as well. And so when they are successful, it allows a building block for us to stand on and saying, okay, here's an example. They're successful. And it allows us to be successful as well. And they stand on our building blocks and we stand on theirs. And that's what we're having to do in today's world in order to demonstrate that it's fine. We have the right and the understanding how to educate our own people. And when you do that, Cherokee is such of a heart language. When you have the right to educate our Cherokee, our young Cherokee hearts. In English, they talk about, their minds. But where our knowledge comes from is from our heart. If we have the right to educate our young Cherokee hearts, then we're going to have what it means to be Cherokee for generations to come. And so Al-Duheen, he has built a plan, and he is working around the clock. We do see other partners that's on this training as well that knows exactly what is happening. And I think that Al-Duheen, maybe we need to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing with the teachers and them telling us what they want the end product to be.
Yeah. So we had on the heels of this, we had a retreat where we brought the teachers and the staff and those who are working with the kids and those individuals at the school together with the intention of starting this process, because we knew we weren't just going to, put it together overnight. This is going to be an endeavor that's probably going to take a number of years to really put it together. Now, while the primary focus will be with developing it around our immersion school, it's certainly something that will have, application to, CLMAP, our community classes, pretty much anywhere where anybody's teaching Cherokee, they could use this material, this content, this curriculum. So we weren't just doing it with the idea, oh, this is only for the kids. This will be for everybody. But we're starting with them because that's really where we need to make those initiatives begin with those younger ones. And so we had this retreat, and we started with the simple question of, what is Cherokee? So when you were growing up, what were the things that you knew, those ideas that you had, that you picked up from your elders, or that you observed, or that you can talk about, that made you Cherokee or made others Cherokee, things that you look for? And so we had these discussions, and we started coming up with these lists. And as we expected, starting out, you get stuff that's all over the board. So you're covering all types of things. So at some point, what's going to happen is we're going to start to continue to collect this, but we're going to start narrowing these down and putting them together, organizing them in terms of times of year, seasons, in terms of ages. There are some things that are relevant or related to gender. So there were some gender things that came up during these conversations, and we're just going to have to organize them. But I'll say that they were very engaged. And I think for a lot of our people, for a lot of our teachers, this was something that they've wanted to do for a long time. They've thought about, but it's not something that they would have been able to do by themselves at the school. And so they were really excited. We really had a wonderful time during the retreat, having these discussions with them and spending time and developing this material. So we're going to start with that and continue to have those conversations and start building this sort of curriculum from these activities, from these ideas, and putting them together. And again, it's going to take a while before we have it in place, but it was a really good start with those teachers. And I learned a lot of things too myself, and it was really, I'll say, seeing them engaged like that, and they were there and they were excited about this. And so I thought it was a wonderful start, and I think we will be able to put it together. We'll be able to get them to put these things together and implement them in the classroom. If anything, they're going to be harassing us about getting this done quicker.
So what is the really neat thing here is that we live in the state of Oklahoma that has certain standards and that sort of thing. And but it's not by any means the highest standard in the United States as far as states go. At this point, the United States isn't the highest standard of learning as far as in the world at this point. So what we're wanting to do is to build teaching methodologies and our curricula to such of a standard that not only do we hit the state's goal, not only do we surpass and hit the national goal and surpass that, we hit our standard. And our standard surpasses all of that. When you look at the world around you, you don't look at it through the eyes of foolishness. And there is the eyes and the thought process and the examination of who we are as a people, that we see the world different, and we react to the world different. So I know that seeing the things, it's just the remnants of that that's left in our people, come through in the different corporations and different things that Cherokee's people has done for decades now. We've changed the world, but that came from the thought process of what we're talking about. And so when we lean into that, it's going to change the Cherokee world. And we know that, the teachers know that. And so we're in a process of making that happen and allowing people to be comfortable in their own skin, to be a Cherokee and think like a Cherokee and look at the world as a Cherokee. That doesn't mean that we don't live in a different world, but we look at that different world through the lens of our world. So, so the thought process is this. This is this example. If you want a child to know how to, like earlier we said, Canuck or Canucci, then I know a lot of people make that with rice now, and this is subsistent type living, but we will put Cherokee values, thought processes, how we do things within that. Then if you want them by the 8th grade to be able to make Canuck, then at some time they need to make that out of what I think they use flint corn once upon a time, a type of white corn that's a cracked hominy. So at some point, the kids, maybe in the 1st grade or 2nd grade or that whatever grade that is, that our elders and teachers say this is where they need to know this. Then they need to know how to plant corn, and at some point they need to know how to make a basket, not a basket that is something that's pretty that we put on desk, and we've been doing that for the last few decades. But the baskets we used to make, that we used to gather things in, that are work baskets. They need to know how to do that, and if they need to know, when they learn that, then they need to know how to gather. And there is certain, I always enjoy watching around, planting season with Wade. He sings the old songs, that sort of thing, when we put them seeds in the ground. They need to experience that. They need to look at that as not just a mainstream thought process of planting corn, but they need to look at how we plant corn as a Cherokee and things we do, and at the time of the moon, and how we do this. When that happens, that keeps going from the gathering to making the hominy, out of that, to drying that hominy. The ash water they put and mix and let that settle, and we take the water off the top and mix that with corn and then drying it and the cracking and all that. But within that, there is all these scientific things that's happening. We will be teaching them about traditionally we planted at this moon, that at this time, all of this sort of things. But on a scientific way, the earth is temperature is this degrees at that time. And that allows the child, for the seeds to do the things that seeds do, all the different processes of that, for growth to start. The pounding, the gathering, the hickory nuts, the pounding of the hickory nuts to make a Canuck, the mix in that, all that sort of stuff. If we want to do that, that's one scenario. They may or may not say that's important, but we start off as saying this is the goal and this is the age we want them to know. Then we backtrack and we work our way. They need to know how to understand what we're saying in Cherokee. Now with the new Durbin Filling Center coming, we're going to be starting our kids off at 6 weeks old in Cherokee. So there will be things that's happening simultaneously as that goes on. And at the end, when we look at a 18-year-old female or 18-year-old male, or by the time that happens, we may have it through college or even through a doctor's. The goal of that, who stands before us, will be a person that has all the credentials that modern day thinks is important, but stands there with them credentials with the heart of what we know that's important for our people to maintain and continue on as a people. So I think this is a game changer, and we've met with administration, we've met with everybody that we need to, and the resources is coming. And so this is where we're going, from the clothes that we wear to, even now, one thing we noticed when we was in Hayward, that the kids just walk around with traditional wear. And I don't know if it's all Duheen, or I asked, what is there ceremonies? What's going on? It's like, no, we demonstrate that. We want our kids to know that traditional wear is fine to wear anytime. And so us as teachers, we demonstrate that in front of our students, and therefore it's common. We make it commonplace. It's not uncommon to see somebody walking through Walmart and with something traditional on. So that's what we're starting to do. We're starting to demonstrate that. And when we talk to, I think, Mr. Todd Inlow, he's like, we need to do this for the whole tribe, because he's really excited about that sort of thing. But Chief of Staff is really, really behind us. But it is something that we shouldn't feel out of place to be Cherokee. It should be common. So, I've talked for a while here, and so I know you're probably burning to say a couple of things.
No, that's good. That's all on point. One of the things that we've seen in this process was, and before I was brought on at the Immersion School, I was at Northeastern State. There's a Cherokee language program there, and I was part of its founding in 2005, and had been there until I started working at the Immersion School last year. And in these places, so I can speak from my personal experience being at NSU, to having a kid who's gone through the Immersion School system, and what I've seen observing the Immersion School system. When that was started, you get kind of used to things running in a certain way. And when that was started, the idea was, well, we need to start it, because the advice that the Hawaiians and others gave was that you can spend your life planning, but if you don't do it, you're not going to get anywhere. So start it and you try to fix it as you go along. But I'm sure some people know, when you do that, when you start it, it's actually really hard to change things after you've been doing them. And so I can talk about NSU. We got really tied to this course type structure where we were really modeled after like Spanish and French and German and these other languages. And so when we taught classes, when we did things, it was always within that kind of framework of what those objectives were for those classes. At the Immersion School, the model that we had, even though there had been input from the Hawaiians and others, was this Western school system where you have these kids sitting at their desks and you cover your math and your science and your humanities or whatever it was, these different topics, and you have these worksheets and you do this and that. And so when it came time to really sort of rethink that, redo that, it is a challenge because we've been so used to operating these systems in this very Western way that the idea of saying, you know what, we can throw out all of that. We don't have to be in the classroom. We can get the students, we can walk outside, we can take a trip and go on a hike, and we can talk about in Cherokee these plants that have meaning to us, these trees, these animals, and that have significance. We have myths, we have stories that relate and basically provide a foundation for understanding our place in the world and how we're supposed to be, along with other people's as well. And providing this foundational kind of information to our Cherokee kids, to our Cherokee people, that we use to build ourselves. And then we can make the other stuff fit. You know, we can do our math, we can do our science, we can do the social studies with these things that we're doing. But it's going to be a process because, again, we're still kind of used. I know I mentioned our teachers are really excited, but it's really tough. And I can speak from experience. If you're used to doing something a certain way, and this is how you've been doing it for 10 years, to do something different, you really have to change your mindset. You really have to unhinge yourself. You have to really take things apart and almost start over. And so getting away from those textbooks, getting away from those, you know, translated documents that we have, and just saying, okay, we're going to just go outside. We're going to do these things because that's what we would do as Cherokees. And this is what these kids need to know. And then we'll figure out the other parts of it, because there are still those people who I understand why they have those concerns, but they get concerned. Well, okay, if we're going to do this, how are we going to, though? How are we going to make sure they meet, you know, academic standard 2.2 in math? How are they going to meet their academic standards in this? Because in the spring, we're going to have these tests that they have to do. And if they do poorly, it looks bad on the school, looks bad on the students. You know, we might have parents rebel. How do we address these things? And ultimately, we have to, you know, allay all those fears that those people have and still stay the course with this sort of completely redevelopment. So when we're talking about redoing the curriculum, we're talking about redoing fundamentally how we do things, how we teach, how the kids learn, how we recruit. So there's going to be ripple effects. So, you know, at some point we're going to see a change at the school in terms of who we admit. And we're going to go through a process of interviewing based on, okay, we're going to be a culture-based school, and that's what this means. A, B, C, you know, your kids are going to be doing this. Is this what you want? You know, it's not going to be, our current application has nothing about culture in it right now. It's just a dry list of, you know, can you provide this documentation, this documentation? And so it doesn't tell us anything about that family or that student's engagement in becoming Cherokee. And so that's one of the things that we need to also change is, if we want to have this school that produces these types of kids, excuse me, then we need to make sure that people know up front what they're getting into. And so that needs to be part of the conversation, part of the process. And I'll let Udawadi's talk while I cough a little bit.
Well, I tried to cut in, but for some reason, touching my space bar, it opened up chat. For some reason, it was really odd. So that's exactly right. What Alduhin's talking about. You have to have the buy-in, and we what's considerably different here is the folks that's working on this has had kids, our own children in the immersion school. So we have feedback at home, right? When I talk about this with Uganovsky, you know, with Alwat, as much as he can understand what I'm trying to say, they have some of their own questions. They see what's going on. We have to have buy-in at home. We have to have buy-in at school, the whole works. What we can't have is someone just waking up and saying, "Feel cute today. I think I want my child to be a Cherokee speaker," right? And comes drops off their kid. We have to accept them. There's no interview process, that sort of thing. And then a few years down the line, them themselves not understand the cultural significance of what this means, and saying, "Hey, I don't want my child to know this or that," or "I want my child to only focus on European arts." Who knows what it is? So the issue is never the children. The issue is always the adults that's around the kids, right? So when we come in and we know that we have to come in and do a very open interview, it has not. Somebody asked me, "So, are you guys planning on interviewing the children?" I said, "No, we're planning on interviewing the parents, the family. The kids is never the issue on any of this." So they come in a blank slate wanting to learn, and but we also know we have to come through, build a curriculum that is built to last, and then do some recordings and that sort of thing to explain exactly what's going on. So if somebody wants to have a real deep conversation, and little Johnny just dropped his tray and all this that happens at school, sometimes we have to focus on the here and now. We miss them opportunities to have that deep conversation with that parent. What we have to have is that recorded, the doctors and that has done all the studies and proven this, and we have that on a DVD or a memory stick or whatever. We're able to say, "Hey, just a second, busy right now, glad to talk to you anytime, but here's a deeper dive of what your questions are," and we hand that over, and it's explained. So there has to be our community has to understand what we're doing. I remember when Immersion School first started, every school around was really concerned. It was a really what I took as an anti Cherokee language movement that and that's exactly what's happened for decades now, if not centuries, that there has been thought processes of explaining that you can only learn something intelligent through the medium of English, right? Our language is not low functioning, I assure you. If anything, it surpasses, right? So explaining all that is important. Having the right teaching methodology is important. Having the right buy-in, the facilities that we're getting ready to build. They've just put a fence around where they're building the Durbin Filling Center, and that's where our school is going to be. And they're getting ready to secure that property so that they can start to build. And I believe it's the fall of 2022 when that can be complete. So all of these things we have to make sure that it happens simultaneously for it to work. And guys, we don't have time to mess up, right? So because our speaking population is dwindling, is waning. So we're coming in and trying to get this kicked off and ready, and that is what we're doing. We've brought in different tribes and different immersion schools to come in and advise us. One of the people was Pila Wilson, and he was here last month that sat and explained the things that he did, and him and his family did in the 80s. And I remember I said, "I heard you guys have 3,000 students," and he kind of sat there and was real kind of polite. And I kept talking. And he said, "No, we have 3,500 now. It's in our immersion schools." And he started the immersion school at the time. It was against the law to speak his language, and Then, talking about, officers and police coming and shutting them down, and them having to hire a certified teacher to come, and all of the things where they, for Native Americans Freedom of Religion Act, and the things that he had been involved in pushing. But these old timers has been involved in that movement, in the world movement of indigenous languages. They're coming beside us, and they're teaching us what mistakes they made, and we're trying to learn the best we can, and get this in alignment as quick as possible. So,
I know it's a little early, but we might, I'm okay with starting, if anybody has any questions at this point. Hopefully we can answer any inquiries people have.
while they're gathering some questions, do you mind kind of explaining who all came to school and kind of helped advise for a few minutes? And I know, and it may give some folks time to write and jot down questions. So,
Yeah, and I was working at Cherokee Nation whenever the Immersion School started. And I wasn't necessarily on the ground level, but I was involved in the discussions. And a lot of it centered around a survey that was done. And so the tribe received monies from A&A, who still continues to fund a lot of language initiatives for tribes. And in this survey, there were questions related to how important was language. If it was important, where should a focus be? If people felt like there should be a focus into those questions, the answer was, yes, it's important. And then they said that we needed to focus on our children. And so that's where kind of the idea of the Immersion School came up. So it started 2002. So in the process of developing it, the Hawaiians were involved, but there were also discussions had with other immersion systems, but the state, there was some discussions with the state and with other programs. I know that the idea was that the program at NSU was supposed to be intricately linked to the Immersion School as a feeder system of teachers into that. And so they were kind of being developed simultaneously, even though the Immersion School started 2002, the program at Northeastern started in 2005. They were supposed to be connected. Now that didn't quite happen, but in the development of the Immersion School, the idea was that it would be really kind of a school similar to what the Hawaiians had. And what the Hawaiians had, one of their primary schools is this place called Navahi, which is a charter school. It's a charter lab school. And so the thought was that we would have something similar that would be under the state, that would have these state academic standards, but would be run as a Cherokee school with these other elements that would be slightly outside of the state system. In reconsidering that, I think we've come to the conclusion, if the state's willing to meet us on these areas where we need to have our own say in how we do things, then we'll get along fine. But I think like the Hawaiians, we need to ultimately say, if we can't get that from the state, we're going to do it anyway. And if that means we have a charter, then we're going to keep the charter, because having the charter is actually useful. None of us are against the charter, but if it gets in the way of what we need to do, then we can at some point get out from under it. And so I think that's where we're operating now. We have these things we're going to do, ways we're going to operate. And if we can get the charter to work for us in doing that, then we'll keep with the charter. But if not, then we'll find a way to get out of it and figure out another structure and system to replace it. And that's conversations to have, as we go along. I see we do have some questions.
Yeah, Aduhin, I think that this question will kind of fall right in line with where you're where your conversation is right now. This question's from Lori. Lori's a teacher in Arizona, where it is now against the law to teach critical race theory. And she believes that that's something that was also passed in Oklahoma recently. So how does that impact the school, or how do you see that impacting the school?
Honestly, and I'm not trying to be flippant, it won't affect us because we're going to teach what we teach. And if the state wants to come after us, the nice thing about our school is we have resources. If something happens, this administration has shown they'll back us up. And so if we get in trouble with the state, I have no doubt whatsoever that we'll get the support we need. The other thing is, if we do it in Cherokee, they're not going to know what we're saying, so it won't matter, right? So I dare them to come down. In fact, I would actually be pleased if they understood Cherokee, if they came and they knew what we were saying, that they would be able to critique it. So, and again, I'm not trying to be flippant, but you know, we have advantages operating like we do under the tribe that we don't have to worry about if I was a teacher in a public school setting. And so we're going to take advantage of those situations that we have. And so I've been paying attention. We've had discussions about this, but we're fortunate in how we can handle it.
You know, just to add something to that, if they could understand Cherokee enough to even critique us, then they wouldn't dare push that ideology on us. So it's a flip. You know, I think it's it would work itself out. But I also know that if they have problems fighting with us, wait until they fight with our chief. So.
Lori, I hope that's the response you're looking for there. And I think that the last couple of weeks have really shown that this current administration really has some local education's back. So especially in terms of the state of Oklahoma right now. So thank you all I like that we can come together and have some really open and candid conversations sometimes. Sometimes we get in these environments where we feel like we can't be as open and candid. And so I'm glad that this topic is. Gentlemen, we're just getting a lot of love in the chats right now. So Joshua Webster just says that he agrees that we need to teach Cherokee with a curriculum based specifically on an idea thought, not an English thought. And if we teach an English curriculum in the Cherokee language, we're only preserving the English thought. So Josh was right on board there for sure. I think we're all on the same page, definitely. So we'll allow a few more minutes for questions to come in. So I do have a question though, while folks are dropping their questions into the chat. So I know that you all took this trip in the spring, and the idea of just being able to recognize culture in all aspects, even in terms of clothing, and how receptive have the students been to that idea? And can you talk about that just a little bit? I know not everything's been able to be fully implemented during this short time, and especially in COVID days. But what is the response that you've seen from your students in this switchover?
Well, I do know that we started making clothing for our students and giving it to them. I did see, it's kind of neat when the parents are making clothing. There's a young boy yesterday at the Immersion School showed up with ribbon shirt, and these little bitty short ribbons. The kiddo must have not have been more than 4 years old or whatever, and he's there learning this language, wearing a ribbon shirt. Now we could arguably say that the ribbon shirt's relatively a new thing, but it's at this point it's a type of identity. I do know that even our teachers, that sort of stuff, we're going out of our way to make clothing for them to have to have it to wear. Of course, you're not trying to force anybody one way or the other, but we do believe that the more that that they see that, then the more comfortable they are is identifying is a Cherokee. If everything around them is Cherokee and they're used to doing that, they don't feel like they're having to make a stand to wear something traditional. And so we see that a little bit with our T-shirts that we're doing out in the communities. I was honored to be one not too long ago. The New York Times came in and was doing an interview and with some speakers, and I thought, well, I want to make sure, this is New York Times. I want to make sure that they're behaving. This is, the speakers of Cherokees. I was ready to come in and if they said something out of line to stop the interview, but of course it went wonderful. But all of them showed up with this T-shirts that we made that gave Cherokees that said, I think it said Chalatuwonis, or that they spoke Cherokee. They have that. They're even the T-shirts that we're giving our communities. I'm constantly seeing people walking around with Cherokee on their T-shirts. Now that's arguably not maybe traditional, but that's still part of our identity. That's still they're making a statement in the clothing that they wear, and so that is it's slowly but surely, I think, changing. And you're right, Kristen, we won't see that totally until the years of COVID is over, and we're not having to worry about every day what's happening, so.
Still just got lots of positive encouragement coming in the chats. It is hard work. You're absolutely right, Josh, and these gentlemen and so many others are put it in every single day, not just an 8 to 5. So I'm so thankful to see that. And Lori's visited some schools, some immersion schools in New Zealand and Finland as well. And looks like both are focused more on translating text with some cultural aspects. And so having such a paradigm shift, she thinks is really going to be a great potential and game changer for Cherokee language and culture. So we really appreciate those kind words, Lori. Mr. Clint Carroll's here with us as well. And so he says, CEO friends, you both mentioned the land-based elements of Cherokee education. How can we advance this conversation in Oklahoma and Cherokee Nation to stress the link between language and land? Just thinking about the connections between tribal land acquisition and such as #landback and conservation for cultural purposes.
I'm dying to answer this one because
This one is actually for Audrey.
Whatever.
I don't know why they still let me come to these things. Or less unmute my mic. Goodness, what are they thinking? But no, we've got about 5 minutes. So this question might wrap up that time, but feel free, gentlemen.
Well, I will try to take it short and then allow Alduheen to follow up. Mr. Carroll, I'm glad you're here. I've seen you name pop up in the chat, and so it was I know your love of our plants, and so already with the Durbin Filling Center, there is a speaker housing that we've just barely have built to the side there. And behind that, there's 38 acres that we're building a language village that will have some language families where a mom and dad that is either knows Cherokee or Intermasher Peninsula, has kids in the Immersion School, we'll be able to move them in. So we are making plans within the village in the center to, and with Pat Quinn, your friend, to have certain plants and we're building it to last. Even that there's a certain, I know a tree may, a hickory tree may be, take 80 years or whatever to have this big, massive amount of product, but needless to say, we are thinking that far ahead that we were planting and saying everything it takes to be a Cherokee should be right here, if possible. And so that is something that we're working on. I know that even with the summer program, the 14 Gen, we've talked about their curriculum, and there's 400 hours of Cherokee that them kids stay during the summer with us, and so they go out to the community, they do these different things. We even, there's areas of, Cherokees, we like to go to the creek, right? And so there is a swimming holes within the 14 county areas that are highly frequented by Cherokee speaking population. And so we even talked about identifying them and making sure that, that class goes out and they pretty much go to the majority of the swimming holes that is so dear to the heart of our speaking population. And I know PNR Park is one of them they go to a lot, but we have them in Bell, around Leeds Creek, these different areas that for over a century now, Cherokees has got together and connected with that location, laughed and camped there and that sort of thing. And we want to be able for the kids to experience that as well. I know that some of the things that Mr. Carroll has done were with the plants around. I'm not going to name the location, but there's a place that he's worked with for years that that there's an area that we can gather medicines for speakers and people that folks can't come in and out there. It's protected just for our medicine plant. So some of there's, I think you call it a level 1 language, level 1 medicine, where a child knows the plant that you rub this to help a burn or whatever. We won't. There's certain areas we can't touch, as I'm sure a lot of people that's on here knows. But what a Cherokee would know when they was 3 years old, or 5 years old, or 7 years old, or what would help poison ivy and that sort of thing, they should know it when they leave our immersion school. So I think these are things that we're lining up right within our curriculum. So Al-Duhin, drive it home. You've got 2 minutes.
Well, I think you touched on all the same points I would have made. I'll just say that absolutely our development of this curriculum will be fundamentally and intricately tied to our natural resources, because it was abundantly clear whenever we had this conversation with the teachers when we were at the retreat in Post Oak, from what we already knew going into this process, that this knowledge and this basis that we're going to create is going to be, a lot of it's going to be out in the world, it's going to be out in nature. And so to have this curriculum operate the way it needs to, we're going to need places to go. We're going to have access to land and these resources that we can use as these natural classrooms for them to learn. And so we'll have to have access to different plants, different animals, and different things. So having the tribe own these and have these will make it obviously a key part of us being able to do what we want to do, not just for us, but if we have any other immersion schools open up, if we have other language programs operating using this curriculum, they will need access to these places as well.
Widow Al-Duhin and Josh, thanks again for some additional comments there. And I think when we start to talk about land and plants, so much is intertwined. And so sessions can only be an hour, unfortunately. And I know some of these topics we could spend all day, and they really do deserve that time. And so much like much like Clint, gentlemen, appreciate you all very much. And as I know everyone else does on our panel. And so thanks for all of our guests and participants for being here with us this afternoon. And go and grab another cup of coffee and join us for our next session. That's going to be starting in about 30 minutes. So we're doing a good.
We're done.
Wadog Nagat.